We are told the United States has achieved total energy independence. Record production of 13.7 million barrels per day supposedly insulates America from Middle East chaos. The reality is completely different. A massive infrastructure mismatch forces America to export the oil it produces while scrambling to import the exact crude grades it desperately needs. And today we break down how American refineries work, the real impact of the Hormuz blockade, and why the American consumer may not be as shielded as they'd like to think. My name is Nick, and this is Bureau Finance. The world's largest oil producer is currently facing a domestic energy crisis, and that's because crude oil is not a monolithic product. It varies wildly in the chemical composition, specifically regarding its density, which the industry measures as API gravity, and its overall sulfur content. Over the past decade, the American shale revolution that uses hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling has unlocked huge amounts of crude oil, propelling domestic production to heights that easily surpassed both Russia and Saudi Arabia. But the vast majority of this newly unlocked domestic production is categorized as light sweet crude, and that, believe it or not, is actually a problem. The United States refining infrastructure, particularly massive industrial complexes situated along the Gulf Coast, was built decades ago at a cost of hundreds of billions of dollars. But those facilities were not engineered to process the light sweet crude that's squeezed out of Texas and North Dakota. Instead, approximately 70% of United States refining capacity was specifically optimized to digest heavy, sour crude. And this is the thick, highly viscous, sulfur-laden oil that flows from places like Venezuela, Mexico, and the Persian Gulf. Now, the United States currently boasts a total refining capacity of roughly 18.4 million barrels per day. But only about 30% of that infrastructure can effectively process the light shale oil that America actually produces from its own soil. Running exclusively light sweet crude through a complex refinery built for heavy sour inputs is incredibly inefficient and economically unviable. Put simply, it is the chemical equivalent of putting premium unleaded fuel into a heavy-duty diesel engine. The machine will not run the way it was designed to. Because these complex refineries are equipped with extremely expensive cokers and hydrocrackers, their entire profit model relies on buying discounted heavy crude and cracking it under immense heat and pressure into high-value light products like gasoline and diesel. And if they switch to processing expensive light sweet crude, they completely destroy their own economic advantage because those expensive secondary processing units sit idle. And this structural mismatch explains why the United States remains a net crude importer to the tune of 2.2 million barrels per day, despite outproducing every other nation on Earth. In 2025 alone, the United States relied on Canada to supply roughly 3.89 million barrels per day of heavy crude just to keep the Midwest refineries operating. They need the heavy crude to keep their industrial backbone functioning, and they need the sour grades to maximize their diesel yields. And crucially, they need the global maritime supply chain to remain completely unobstructed to deliver those specific barrels to the Gulf Coast. But the global maritime supply chain has just suffered a catastrophic failure. Following the attack by the US and Israel on Iran in late February, the Strait of Hormuz effectively clamped shut. And this single waterway normally handles roughly 17.2 to 20 million barrels of crude oil every single day, representing 20% of the entire total supply. But since the crisis began, commercial tanker transits through the strait have plummeted by an estimated 90 to 95%. And the immediate casualty of this blockade was the exact type of oil that American refineries desperately rely on. OPEC production plunged by an estimated 73 million barrels per day in March alone. Iraq saw its southern field production collapse by roughly 70%, falling from 4.15 million barrels per day down to just 1.4 million barrels per day. Saudi Arabia was forced to cut production by approximately 2 million barrels per day because their storage tanks reached critical capacity with no shipping available. and they attempted to route crude through their east-west pipeline to the Red Sea port of Yanbu, using its emergency capacity of 7 million barrels per day. But reports indicate that approximately 40 crude carriers are currently anchored outside Yanbu, completely paralyzed. And this is because the Houthis have effectively entered the chat and are now threatening to close the Bab al-Mandeb Strait at the southern entrance of the Red Sea, effectively severing the last viable maritime oil exit route. And the barrels that were suddenly trapped behind this dual choke point blockade were primarily Arab heavy and Arab medium grades. And these are the exact heavy sour feedstocks that serve as the workhorse inputs for the American refining industry. The market reaction was what you'd expect. Brent crude surged from roughly $60 a barrel in early January to an intraday peak of $115.89 by early March, before settling into its current range of around $107 a barrel. But that's still a 77% increase in just 3 months. And this price explosion was driven entirely by the invisible hand of maritime insurance. Within 48 hours of the initial strikes, major marine insurers issued blanket cancellation notices for war risk coverage in the Persian Gulf. Before the conflict, war risk premium for transit into this region cost less than 0.1% of the vessel's hull value. Today, those rates have skyrocketed to anywhere between 3 and 10%. For a standard $100 million supertanker, a single transit could now require up to $7.5 million just in insurance premiums. And this even assumes you can find an underwriter that is willing to take the risk. And because of this unmanageable physical risk, the heavy crude that American refineries need is trapped, forcing them to scramble for alternative sources. The United States actually doubled its imports of Venezuelan heavy crude in the weeks leading up to mid-March, reaching roughly 280,000 barrels per day. But Venezuela's total production of 1.1 million barrels per day is nowhere near sufficient to replace the 7 million barrels lost from the Middle East. And this, of course, begs the question of how ordinary people are supposed to protect their purchasing power when the global energy market breaks down. So, if you want to stay informed, make better investment decisions, and avoid being blindsided by structural inflation shocks like the ones we are covering today, then you should read the Coin Bureau Finance newsletter. It's absolutely free, and we break down everything regarding global finance, commodity markets, macroeconomic trends, and monetary policy so that you never miss what truly matters. All you have to do is click the link in the description or scan this QR code on your screen to get started. And now, back to the hidden mechanics of the American refinery crisis. Because the true absurdity of this situation is only revealed when you look at what the United States is doing with its own domestic oil during this exact same period. While American refineries are desperate for heavy sour crude, the United States is simultaneously exporting roughly 4 million barrels of its own light sweet crude every single day. They are shipping it to South Korea, the Netherlands, and India because those nations actually possess the refining infrastructure configured to process it. And this creates a bit of a paradox, wherein the United States is forced to export its own oil at the exact same moment it is facing a domestic energy emergency. And the financial markets are reflecting this crazy state of affairs. By early April, West Texas Intermediate, or WTI crude, actually traded at a $3 premium over Brent crude, and this is the widest reversal of that spread since 2009. And it happened because global refineries in Asia and Europe were desperately buying American light sweet crude as a substitute for offline Middle Eastern grades like Abu Dhabi Murban. Goldman Sachs estimates that roughly $14 to $18 of that current Brent crude price is a pure war premium. And a massive portion of this premium is flowing into a dark, unregulated maritime economy. Because Western insurers have fled, a shadow fleet of approximately 1,100 older vessels has stepped in to move the oil. And these shadow tankers are reportedly paying transit fees of up to $2 million per vessel directly to the IRGC to pass safely through the Strait of Hormuz. And crucially, these multi-million-dollar tolls are likely being settled in Chinese yuan, completely bypassing the Western financial system. And we actually covered the dark fleet and shadow shipping in this separate video, which you can watch right over here. So, the world is paying top dollar for light American oil, while American refineries are paying exorbitant geopolitical risk premiums to import heavy oil. And this premium is generating a windfall for the stealth winners of the crisis. Consider the financial performance of Valero, one of the largest complex refiners in the United States. In the first quarter of 2025, when crude was trading at roughly about $60 a barrel, Valero posted a net loss of nearly $595 million. Their refining margin was squeezed down to just $9.78 per barrel. But today, with Brent hovering above $107, the crack spread has exploded. Now, just FYI, the crack spread is simply the profit margin between the cost of the raw crude oil and the price of the refined products like gasoline and diesel. By late March of 2026, Gulf Coast crack spreads had surged to roughly $40 to $47 per barrel. And that is roughly 2.5 times their normal operating margins. Analysts estimate that this spread expansion alone is adding nearly $900 million per month to Valero's cash flows. The refinery that was bleeding money at $60 of crude is now printing at $107. And the upstream exploration companies are capturing an equally lucrative bid. EOG Resources, one of the largest operators in the Permian Basin, has seen its stock price surge over 32% this year. Devon Energy and Diamondback Energy are seeing similar massive gains, with Diamondback's earnings projections rising by 22% post-conflict. And these companies built their operational cost structures to generate free cash flow when oil was at $30 to $40 a barrel. And the marginal break-even cost for a new well in the Permian Basin is approximately $62 per barrel. At $107 a barrel, the gross margin they capture on every single unit they pump is extraordinary. And this is the textbook definition of socializing the costs and privatizing the profits. The energy sector is capturing the geopolitical risk premium while the downstream consequences are being entirely absorbed by the public. And that macroeconomic transmission is precisely what's draining your bank account. Because the cost of importing that heavily insured, rerouted heavy crude does not stay contained within the walls of the Texas refinery, it is immediately passed down the supply chain to you and me, the consumer. By the end of March 2026, the national average for regular gasoline crossed the $4 per gallon threshold for the first time since August 2022. In places like California, where the closure of the Phillips 66 Wilmington and Valero Benicia refineries removed nearly 284,000 barrels per day of capacity, prices surged past $6 a gallon. But gasoline is only part of the problem. The true structural inflation threat lies in the price of diesel. Because complex refineries are struggling to source the heavy sour crude that yields the highest volumes of diesel, the national average for on-highway diesel surged to $5.46 per gallon by early April, representing a catastrophic 45% price spike in just 30 days. And diesel is the embedded cost multiplier for the entire physical economy. It powers the 18-wheelers, the agricultural machinery, the freight locomotives, and the maritime tugs. Fuel accounts for up to 40% of trucking companies' total operating costs. So, when diesel spikes 45% in a single month, logistics operators cannot simply absorb that loss. Small owner-operators are reporting $10,000 to $20,000 in weekly fuel cost swings, driving a massive wave of trucking bankruptcies. The larger carriers survive because they pass the costs on immediately through automated fuel surcharges. The United States Postal Service has officially filed for its first ever 8% temporary fuel surcharge on package services, effective late April. Amazon, meanwhile, has implemented a 3.5% logistics surcharge on every third-party seller using its fulfillment network. FedEx and UPS are currently levying fuel surcharges ranging from 20% to 34% on top of their base shipping rates. And every single one of those tolls is ultimately paid by you at the online checkout or the grocery store till. The Food and Drink Federation has already revised its 2026 food inflation forecast from 3% up to 9% to 10% by year end. Conservative estimates suggest that this will add more than $100 per month to the average American household's grocery budget. Perishables like fresh produce, meat, and dairy are the most exposed because refrigerated reefer trucks consume significantly more diesel than standard dry vans. And the pain is not isolated on the ground. The aviation sector is absorbing a massive indirect blow from these exact same refinery constraints. United Airlines is currently projecting its 2026 fuel costs to rise by over 10% to $12.84 billion. Delta Airlines has already absorbed an estimated $400 million in additional fuel costs in the first quarter of 2026 alone. Global airlines have increased passenger fuel surcharges by roughly 34%, and the consumer price index component for airline fares is projected to spike by 20%. And this inflation transmission operates with a lag. While crude oil spikes hit the gas pump within 2 to 4 weeks, the diesel-driven grocery inflation takes 3 to 6 months to fully work its way through supply chain contracts. With the February 2026 CPI index already sitting at an annualized pace of roughly 2.6%, the March and April readings are set to capture this massive downstream consequence. Goldman Sachs estimates that every $25 increase in crude oil prices raises core personal consumption expenditures inflation by 0.1%. They also project that this oil shock will reduce United States payroll growth by 10,000 jobs per month through the end of the year. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve is effectively paralyzed. They cannot print more heavy sour crude, and they cannot lower interest rates to ease consumer pain without risking a secondary bout of inflation. And the most alarming aspect of this entire crisis is that there is no quick infrastructure fix available. Politicians frequently claim that we should just build new refineries or retool our existing ones to process light sweet oil. But the engineering reality makes this nearly impossible in the short term. Upgrading a single existing refinery to process meaningfully different crude grades costs between $100 million and $1 billion per facility. With the United States operating approximately 130 of these refineries, reconfiguring the national fleet would require well over $100 billion in aggregate capital expenditure and take the better part of a decade to complete. And the major refineries have zero financial incentive to make these massive investments, because they face the long-term threat of electric vehicle adoption reducing future gas demand, making billion-dollar infrastructure bets extremely risky. Furthermore, the United States light shale production from the Permian Basin is expected to plateau or peak by the early 2030s. Refiners are essentially being asked to spend billions reconfiguring their plants for a feedstock that may be in structural decline within a decade. Even the highly publicized America First refining project in Brownsville, Texas, which is the first new greenfield refinery built in the US in roughly 50 years, perfectly illustrates this timeline. At a cost of roughly $6.7 billion, it will eventually add 168,000 barrels per day of light sweet processing capacity. But that represents barely 1% of the total national refining throughput, and it will take years before the first drop of fuel is actually produced. So the era of pretending that raw production volumes equal energy independence is officially over. You can pump 13 million barrels of light sweet crude every single day. But if your industrial plumbing requires heavy sour imports, you are permanently tethered to the geopolitical chaos of the global supply chain. The structural mismatch in American infrastructure guarantees that whenever global energy markets fracture, the average American will foot the bill in the end. Turns out they're in the same boat as the rest of us. So what do you reckon? Will the United States eventually invest the hundreds of billions of dollars required to reconfigure its refineries? Or will Uncle Sam remain permanently dependent on heavy crude imports? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you want to understand how the shadow fleet is actively bypassing Western sanctions to keep this global oil market moving, check out that video I mentioned right over here. That's all from me today. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. This is Nick, signing off.